Okay, let's talk about biology. So, welcome to the very first chapter for Bio 110. We are going to be talking about what is biology, what is the science of life, and getting into some of the things with the scientific method that you'll be using for the entire semester. So, we are going to start all of our units, all of our chapters, everything that we do with lecture. The very first slide in all of the PowerPoints will be the Chapter 1 learning outcomes that are directly the chapter learning outcomes from your textbook. So these are the things that I have identified as being key and important for you to learn from this particular unit. And these are going to be the sorts of things that will determine the questions on your homework, on your attendance quizzes, that will determine the questions on your exams. So if you're ever struggling with any particular topic of the learning outcomes, what I want you to do is take these and go into your textbook and read the corresponding section. So if you have the textbook, yours will be the online version because you have an ebook. What you'll see if you go in, though, I have a physical copy here, is at the beginning of a section, it will say the characteristics of life, unit 1.1. You'll see these purple boxes. These boxes are going to be where those learning outcomes came from. So for each chapter, the learning outcomes are listed in the different sections. So the first three here, the first 4 points on this slide come from section 1.1 in the textbook. I'm going to go over them in the lectures, and you'll see them in the homework and the attendance quizzes, as I had said. But whenever you need additional help or you want to do additional reading, your book is fantastic. It has tons of great pictures, tons of extra material that is related directly to the things that you're learning about. So that is going to be my biggest recommendation to you in being successful in this course. So, with that being said, I'm not going to read these to you. You have these available to you on all of the PowerPoints you can download from Canvas. And so just keep in mind that this is the first slide of every PowerPoint for Bio 110. So let's go through the characteristics of life. If you go to different resources or you go to Google and you ask Google, what are the characteristics of life? You're going to get a variety of different answers. Basically, though, the answers boil down to some key traits that scientists have decided all living organisms share. You, to be a living organism, have to have all of these particular traits. Our textbook has 6, so these are the 6 you're going to be asked to know. Okay? So, for chapter 1, we're talking about those characteristics of life. And what I like to think about is if I go through and I say, okay, organization, energy processing, homeostasis, response to stimuli, reproduction and development, and adaptation and evolution. Those are 6 characteristics that we might look at a living organism like bacteria or human or plant or fungi or even ourselves, our cats, our dogs, whatever it is we're looking at and say, okay, does it have all 6 of these traits? Now, that isn't to say that these traits cannot be applied to non-living parts of our world. So, for instance, take a car, okay? If you have a car and we were to remove the biological part of this, which a lot of things do, we kind of talk about it as organization and abbreviate it as organization rather than biological organization, which basically means the cells of an organism. We might say that cars have organization. Cars are organized in a particular manner, right? They've got 4 wheels, they've got doors, they've got a windshield, they've got a roof. You know the basics of a car, okay? Cars do energy processing. You have to put gas in your car, or if you have an electric car, you have to plug it in order to get your car to function. So energy processing is very key there, right? Cars maintain homeostasis, and if your car has ever overheated on you, that is an instance of your car not maintaining homeostasis in that case. We'll talk about homeostasis a little bit more. The smarter cars get today, that response to stimuli is true. It started with kind of the windshield or the side mirrors that had the light that was like, oh, there's a car next to you, or that lane adjust where if you were pulling over the middle lane, the car would swerve you back. Now, you have these Teslas where people really don't have to do a whole lot. So that's going to be a response to stimuli because the Tesla will brake automatically if something is in front of it, for instance. while cars don't necessarily reproduce, we do see a development in cars. And that actually, if you talk about building a car, that could be considered the development part. And then adapt and evolve, cars have absolutely changed since they were first invented. And so really we could say, okay, cool, but like these characteristics kind of apply to non-living organisms. Right, but it's the specifics within these characteristics that scientists use to classify something as living or non-living. So let's go through each of these a little bit more with some specifics to why they are used to define living organisms rather than the non-living or abiotic organisms. So biological organization is basically this idea that atoms build molecules, build cells, and then that kind of goes up through the entire ecosystem with, tissues, organs, organ systems, etc. Now, when we talk about biology, most of the time we're really concerned with things being made of cells. The cell theory is one of the key classifications of biology. It's a huge theory in biology. That is the idea that all cells come from other cells and cells share certain characteristics. We will spend a little time talking about atoms and molecules because if we don't understand the biological chemistry of cells, then we kind of lose track of some of these other things when we get to higher levels of organization in our class. We will absolutely talk about communities and ecosystems and things as we move through the semester. So biological organization is often and okay to change out with the word cells. If you say cells, totally acceptable. But keep in mind that it's this idea that cells are the basis of living organisms and they build all of the systems up from then, okay? And they're nested, like Russian nesting dolls, right? If you can't have a tissue without having cells. Tissues are cells that work together. You can't have organs without tissues and so on and so forth, okay? The second characteristic of life is this idea of energy processing. Now, this will not go away this entire semester. And what's really important is this is actually the entirety of Unit 2, is talking about how energy is processed in our ecosystem and how it plays a huge role in the decisions that you make on a daily basis, as well as the decisions other organisms make and these interactions between living organisms on this planet. Energy processing is this idea that energy is brought into our system through solar energy, which is trapped by plants and utilized to build sugars that are able to be used by other organisms on this planet. However, the chemicals that make up these cells, carbon and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen and so on, are going to be cyclical in our ecosystem. So what's really cool about this is that while energy is eventually lost, right? You need to eat every day because if you don't eat, you're not yourself. You need some food. You get a little hangry. And when you eat, you feel better again. You feel energized. You don't feel as lethargic. You also need those nutrients from your food. But the nutrients that you consume have always existed on this planet. So some of my favorite things are this idea that we are made of stardust because really the carbon that's existed on this planet has always existed. If you've ever watched Frozen 2, when Olaf is talking about how water has memories and like water is kind of all connected between living organisms, it's really true in that sense that water is cycled through an ecosystem, but energy is going to be eventually lost and has to be replaced, right? When you fill up your car's gas tank, you don't get to use it forever. Eventually your car is going to utilize as much of that energy as it can. Cars get hot when they're running, just like you get hot when you're running, and that energy is eventually lost as heat and needs to be replaced, okay? Awesome. This is a huge one. Do not forget energy processing. It's going to play a role in everything we do through the semester. Response to stimuli is pretty straightforward, I think, but we tend to think about response to stimuli in large scales like humans and plants and animals, humans being animals. But everything that's living responds to stimuli. Bacteria respond to stimuli. They swim towards a food source, so they grow into a food source. Mushrooms and fungi respond to stimuli. If you ever make bread, if you have yeast that's just in the jar or in the packet and it's just hanging out, it's not actively going through the process of dividing because it doesn't have the stimuli for that. If you want your yeast to go through the process of fermentation, you have to add it to warm water and sugar so that the yeast has what it needs in order to do that. And the yeast responds to those external stimuli of the water, moisture, and the sugar content. So everything that lives, everything that's living is going to respond to some sort of stimuli. Okay, and this includes plants growing towards sunlight, or if you've ever found a tortoise or a turtle and you picked it up and it went into its shell, that is a response to that stimuli of being picked up. Okay. Reproduction, growth, and development is the purpose of chapter or unit 3, so chapters 8, 9, and 10 in Bio 110. And this is really, really big because reproduction, growth, and development are a lot of times split into separate things. From even the Amoeba sisters talk about reproduction and growth and development as different, but really, reproduction is this idea of either cells making copies of themselves, going through asexual reproduction called mitosis, or organisms reproducing through meiosis to make new versions of that living organism. In either case, reproduction is going to generate new organisms, whether it's just new cells or whether it's a brand new organism like a mama cat with her baby kittens, okay? When we talk about growth and development, that's still when cells are making copies of themselves. So those kittens, while they're really cute and tiny right now, are not going to stay cute and tiny. If you've ever seen a kitten, they grow very, very quickly. And you're going to see that growth as a response to reproduction, to cells making copies of themselves. The same thing if you ever get a cut and that cut heals, that's going to be a type of reproduction. It is a type of cellular reproduction, and it is a key trait to living organisms. If organisms couldn't make copies of themselves, one, populations would cease to exist because you need to replace yourself as a cell or as a human or whatever in order for a population to continue growing. But in addition, when cells got worn out, if they were just never replaced, every cut that you'd ever received would still exist on your body. And that is not going to be what we see happening. And so this is really key to allowing organisms to continue to live. Okay? Next is a huge thing. Evolution is a core concept of biology. There are a couple of major theories of biology: the cell theory, okay, the theory of inheritance, and the theory of evolution. Evolution is a process by which populations change over time in a response to external pressures, okay? And that external pressure is called natural selection. Individuals who are best adapted to their environments are going to survive and pass on those genes to their offspring through reproduction and growth and development. So I found these two pictures. I love foxes. I love everything fuzzy. I have a fox on my wall, if you haven't noticed. So this is a fennec fox and an Arctic fox, okay? And a lot of us are familiar with that. They're very cute. They're very popular. Everybody kind of gets an idea of some of these major organisms. Fennec foxes live in the desert. Arctic foxes live in the Arctic in the cold and snow. But both of these are adapted to their environments. If I were to take these foxes and swap where they were, okay, if I were to take a fennec fox and put it out into the Arctic, it would die from cold exposure, okay? It would not be able to survive in that environment. And the same thing if I took the Arctic fox and put it into the desert. Part of that, and what's really cool, is we can see these physical traits here that are different. Arctic foxes are built for heat retention. Their limbs are shorter. Their muzzles are a little bit shorter. Their ears are absolutely shorter because those are going to be extremities that very quickly lose heat. And so they're much smaller. And in addition, then this Arctic fox gets this really thick, fluffy coat that allows it to stay warm. Plus, the coat is white, which allows it to hide from predators and hide from potential prey. The fennec fox, on the other hand, has these really long limbs compared to its body size. They have really long limbs, and we love the fennec foxes because their ears are ginormous. Well, those ginormous ears are allowing them to lose heat quickly and to stay cooler in a very hot environment. In addition, then the color also is good for camouflage. So these are just some examples of how two related species of organisms, these foxes are related, are completely adapted to their particular environment, and we see that they have changed over time to be best situated in that environment. Okay, this is something that's going to come up over and over again because when we're looking at organisms, natural selection and evolutionary processes explain to us how and why organisms are living in their environment that they're in, how they're adapted, how they've gotten to where they are, how they are able to reproduce and make offspring, and how they are able to survive in the changing world that they live in. So when we talk about things, we're going to talk about different evolutionary processes. We're going to talk about the Galapagos finches and how they have adaptive radiation, or an ancestor that went to the Galapagos Islands, and now we have all these different finches that exist there, and these finches are adapted to the different food sources that they eat. And so you're not going to see this woodpecker finch making babies with this large ground finch, even though they share a common ancestry in that they have an ancestor that moved out to the islands. They are not going to be the same anymore. They have changed. Their entire species has changed as a response to these external environments. Okay, we're going to talk about evolution and natural selection a lot this semester as well. So these characteristics of life do not go away. They are going to be the key that allow us to continue building our understanding with more detailed information in the units that we cover through Bio 110. Okay. In each PowerPoint, you will find a slide after a section that says check your understanding. So these are questions that potentially could show up on an exam or something similar to them, and they are built again off of those chapter learning objectives or outcomes. It's not everything that you should absolutely know, but here are just some example questions that you could study that would help you maybe ensure that you understand the key aspects here. I have the answers to these in the notes portion of the PowerPoint, so I do suggest that you try answering them and then check your answers. That's the best way to study. If you just go read my answers, that's not going to help you to see what you retained or what you understood. As well, if you ever come to these check your understanding questions and you can't answer them, that's when you should stop and go back through the section that we just went through, look through the PowerPoints, listen to the unit lecture again, the video, or go into the book and make sure that you are reading up on those sections so that you can understand this material appropriately, especially because we're going to build on this throughout the semester. So I will never read through these. I'm not going to do this. You should pause the video, try to answer these questions, see what you got, use this as a break point, take a short break, come back, continue on to the next part of the unit, of the chapter. Okay? So the next part is going to be the scientific method, okay? We use this constantly. You probably don't think you do, but you do, okay? We as humans are constantly using the scientific method. We are always doing it. There are 5 main steps to the scientific method, and again, this is like those characteristics of life. If you Google it, you might see some different results, but these are the 5 that I want you to know for our class, okay? And most people would agree that these are the major 5 steps of the scientific method. 1, you should make an observation, okay? After you make a observation, you're going to create a hypothesis. For our class, I would like you to practice writing hypotheses as if-then statements, okay? So you make an observation and you write a hypothesis, okay? After you do that, you will do an experiment, you will collect and analyze data, and then you're going to share the results. This is key. This is the big difference here, okay? If you don't share your results, you're not doing appropriate sciencey stuff. So let's talk about an everyday example of something we might find that we use the scientific method for, okay? For like a lot of people, for a while, I did not have regular dental care, right? You get to be an adult, you're off your parents' insurance, you don't necessarily have a job giving you insurance, and you're just like, okay, I'm going to brush my teeth, I'm going to floss, I'm going to do my best, but I'm not going to the dentist every 6 months because I can't pay for that out of pocket, okay? It's probably a universal experience here. So you make an observation, okay? I go to the dentist for the first time after not going for like 5 or 6 years because I didn't have dental insurance. And my dentist tells me that while I did a decent job keeping my teeth clean, I do have several small cavities that need to get filled, okay? That would be my observation. My teeth are hurting a little bit. I haven't gone to the dentist. I need to get these cavities filled. So I get my cavities filled and I think to myself, okay, if I brush my teeth twice a day if I floss once a day and if I go to the dentist every 6 months, I won't have cavities anymore, okay? And I do that. I set up an experiment. I say, if I do these proper teeth cleaning procedures, then I will not have cavities, okay? That's an easy experiment to set up. And, I'm not saying we're all good at it, right? But I brush my teeth for 2 minutes a day. I got myself one of those toothbrushes that times it for you, right? You just do the 4 quadrants. You floss. You go to the dentist regularly. The next time you go in, you have no cavities. So that's collecting and analyzing results, right? That's saying, okay, I set up this experiment. I said, if I do proper dental hygiene and I go to the dentist, then I will not have cavities, which thank goodness, because cavities are expensive, right? I did the experiment where I was maintaining the proper procedures for the 6 months. And then I went to the dentist and I found out that I did the right thing and I did not have cavities again. I go home and I share those results with my husband and I say, hey, guess what, babe? We don't have to pay any more for cavities to get filled. I don't have any cavities, okay? Cool. We do this all the time. If you've ever had an electronic device die or stop working on you, okay, you're going to do a series of steps to check that. The thing that becomes really important with the scientific method is that your procedure needs to maintain consistency while you're doing your experiment, okay? And what you might find is that you have to kind of go back and start it over again. And that's completely acceptable, okay? You should only ever change one thing at a time, though. I had already been brushing my teeth and flossing, but now I added in the better toothbrush, or I added in going to the dentist regularly. In any case, I'm not changing a ton of things at once. What we do when we do scientific method is we want to be very methodical and precise in how we are trying to determine if our hypothesis is supported or refuted. Okay? We don't prove anything in science. Prove is a very dirty word in my class. Please don't say prove. I threaten my seated students with having a prove jar, like a swear jar, but like when you say you proved something. Because really, if we prove something, what's the point of continuing to research it? And so we don't actually ever prove anything in science. We either generate hypotheses that are testable and able to be retested and then able to be shared with people, or we can determine and develop a theory in science. I had mentioned that there are 3 main theories in biology: the cell theory, the theory of inheritance, and the theory of evolution. You as an individual have a hypothesis, okay? Hypotheses that have been tested many times over with the same results, with years of research by lots of individual groups of researchers, will eventually become a theory. And theories still aren't proven. We're still finding new things out about evolution all the time. We're still finding new things out about the cell theory. Every year that I teach this class, something new comes out about the origin of the cell on this planet. We don't ever get to a point where we're done learning. That's the big thing with science, okay? You are never done learning. You might think you know everything. You absolutely do not. I do not know everything. I am the first person to tell you I don't know everything. And I'm more than happy to try to figure that out, because that is what a scientist does. We ask questions, we build hypothesis, we test with an experiment. A lot of times we do literature searches and do research involved in that before we even get to the point of doing an experiment, before we even get to the point of analyzing data and drawing conclusions. We are going to be very specific in how we go about setting up and testing an experiment. And in doing that, that brings me to a controlled laboratory experiment. So you as a student are going to be doing experiments because a science class requires hands-on learning components, okay? You have a lab kit. You are going to be doing experiments from the lab kit. Now you have instructions, okay? You're not just figuring these things out on your own. However, when you're doing your experiment, I want you to keep in mind that you should be writing a hypothesis, that's an if-then statement, and then you should be thinking about the controlled aspect of a laboratory experiment. Generally speaking, we have 3 main variables in an experiment. you have the independent variable, which is the thing that you change. Now, you might be testing a lot of different independent variables, but if I'm doing my tooth cleaning example, okay, and I say, okay, I'm going to now floss twice a day, I'm going to brush my teeth 3 times a day, I'm going to get the fanciest toothbrush, I'm going to get a water pick, I'm going to get different toothpaste, like, that's too many things. I didn't need to change that much. I just added in going to the dentist every 6 months, or making sure that I was actually sticking to the brushing my teeth for 2 minutes a day, because that can be a big part. When you change an independent variable, you only want to do that in one aspect of the experiment. So in this example video picture that I have here, someone is measuring different liquids and the effect it has on plant growth. So in this image, plant A is getting watered with a soda, plant B is getting watered with a juice, and plant C is getting watered with water. Okay? I should say watered, but it's getting watered. It's a verb. Okay? I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I might think, okay, if the plant prefers orange juice, it will grow more as a result of being given orange juice rather than regular water. Okay? That is a hypothesis. And then I'd have another hypothesis that said if a plant likes Coke, it's going to grow more than growing with regular water, right? Or whatever it may be. The hypotheses can be varied based on what you're looking at, okay? So you can change multiple independent variables, but each independent variable should have its own test setup. Okay? The dependent variable is then what is changed based on the independent variable. So, for example, we're saying, okay, the height or health of the plant, right? I legitimately did this experiment with some Boy Scouts a couple of years ago. The Boy Scouts had to do an experiment with controlled variables and independent variables, and so we set everything up, and they all had bean plants. They were the same bean plant, same seeds. They were planted in the same kind of pot, the same size pot, at the same time. They were kept in the greenhouse, watered, until the plants started growing. Okay, we wanted the plants to be grown. We had planted seeds. Temperature is consistent, right? Humidity is consistent, sunlight is consistent. And then the Boy Scouts were given choices. They were given choices of using regular water, using salt water, or using fertilizer water. And so they were seeing what happened to their plants if they were giving them these different kinds of liquids. And the dependent variable for the students, they told me, the plants in the salt water are going to die. And I said, okay, cool. If you think that's going to be the change that we see, then that is the change that we are looking for. That would be our dependent variable. And the independent variable was giving the plant salt water, okay? The Boy Scouts, they were like 9 years old. They loved it, right? They were like, yes, let's give the plants salt water. Let's see what happens. So I'm like, you guys know what's going to happen. They're like, yeah, but we want to see it. Please be like a 9-year-old when you're doing your experiments in my class, okay? Get excited about it. In that case, though, the only thing we were changing was the kind of liquid the plant was given. All of the plants were in the same kind of soil. They were in the same environment. They didn't have different, I didn't put some of the plants in the dark and some of the plants in the sun, and some of the plants were getting, half light, half sun. That wasn't the variable I was testing. I was testing the liquids. So the only thing we changed was the liquids. Everything else was the same. Okay, that is what we're going to be looking for in our experiments. I want you to think about a hypothesis, and I want you to think about what are the independent and dependent and control variables for all of the experiments that you run. Okay, and knowing these things about the scientific method, knowing the steps that are involved, knowing how scientists are always questioning and changing and retesting, and even that theories are not proven, that brings us to my last point that I want to make, because we live in a very social world, okay? I bring this up all the time because I think it's hilarious. Several years ago, I had, a handful of students come to me and say, Ms. Larson, what do you think? What do you think about the person who is building animals, genetic experiments in their garage and releasing them into the wild? And I was so confused. I was so confused. I was like, you guys, what are you talking about? And so they showed me this video, and I'm watching this video on TikTok or Instagram, and it had been shared and shared and shared and shared and shared again. And it was someone who was doing science and at the end, they were like, I released this frogfish into the wild, and they showed a video, and it's a mud skipper. It is a type of animal that actually exists. And I was like, guys, this is fake. This is fake. This is someone being satirical. This is someone being silly. This is not real. And they were very, very certain that it was real. And so I want to bring in this idea that there is tons of satire, misinformation, and different things that we would consider pseudoscience in today's social world, okay? I've seen different versions of this quote on the side here from this Kyle Plant emoji, but this idea that the secret scientists don't want you to know. Every time I see those headlines, I cackle, because no scientist has ever wanted to keep a secret. Literally nothing, okay? He's talking about, my friends are desperate for me to know about the changing mating habits of brown marmorated stink bugs. I guarantee to you, if you find someone who is researching brown marmorated stink bugs, they want to tell you everything. They would tell you everything about it. Nobody, no scientist who's doing like the actual scientific method, doing research, that big step of communication, we want to tell you everything, okay? And then the other thing that I think is really important is Brian Cox, who is a very wonderful scientist who does a lot of things like Neil deGrasse Tyson, says real scientists are delighted when they find out they're wrong. And to me, that is one of the greatest gifts that a scientific education can bring. There are too many people in this world who want to be right and too few who just want to know. I want you as a student in my class to just want to know, to just go, I didn't know that. What can I learn? Can I learn more? Let me be excited. But when you go and do that and you go out and you do some of your own research, don't rely on the Google AI, okay? If you go out and type in a Google question, it's going to tell you something it may be wrong, okay? If you don't know enough, you cannot trust that it is accurate. I had a student a couple semesters ago that was arguing with me that squirrels, the gray squirrels in our trees, drop their tails because Google told them they do. No. Okay? So you need to know the difference between science and pseudoscience, or what is good science and what is questionable. Okay? 1, science has hypotheses that can be tested or disproven. Again, I don't like the word proven, but that's okay. This was a really good chart here. Okay? Science relies on a consistent body of findings from different scientists. We use data to continually change and refine our hypotheses. Your hypothesis is never set in stone. It's never done. It's never done, okay? Experiments are repeated, and your research is available for other instructors, other students, other scientists to repeat themselves, okay? They use the scientific methods, and then they verify their research through peer review and scrutiny. Pseudoscience, some of the things like those weight loss drugs, and I'm not saying like some of them aren't real, but I remember for a while there were a lot of like this diet tea, this tea is going to help you lose weight. I went and found information on that tea. It was just a diuretic and a laxative. Yeah, it's going to help you lose weight, but there was data that proved the findings and ignores the data. There was a self-proclaimed experts that decide what is true. It doesn't change conclusions in the face of contradicted data. A lot of times they throw out or like ignore that data. You can make data say whatever you want. Now, someone who's doing real science is going to look at the results and say, oh, this didn't work. Oh, well, let me share what I found that didn't work so that you can figure out a way to make it work. My master's research was technically not results. There were no results. It was 2 years of research that ended up with okay. No results are still results, and good scientists will tell you when they didn't have good results, okay? Anytime that you're going out and looking at something, I want you to see if you can figure out, like, where's this paper, right? And headlines do this all the time. Newspapers will take information and they'll write it out, and they're not going to tell you where it's from or how they found that information or who you can go read it from. Please make sure that you're thinking that way as you're going through not just this semester in my class, but in the future in your own life. If that's one thing you take away from Bio 110, please, okay, take away this idea of what makes something good science and what makes something real versus not real on the internet. Okay, here is your check your understanding for the section that we just went over. Again, remember, if you cannot answer these questions, the answers are in the notes section of the PowerPoint, but you should be able to answer these based on what we just went through. And if you haven't, make sure you go through the reading as well. These are going to be the basis of your homework questions. Make sure you do those, as well as your attendance quiz. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.